Well, John, I always enjoy discussing serious matters with you. I remember when we did a class on honor together many years ago, and I've always enjoyed your challenging mind and your own inquiring spirit. And I know that you have an interest in Alfred North Whitehead, a personal interest in a 20th century philosopher. And I want to talk a little bit about Whitehead, and especially the way he helps us overcome dualisms in life. So Whitehead has been an important figure. Have you continued to study him over the years? I know he was important to you at one time.
Yeah, I still read him. In fact, I use my spirit. Most of my spirituality tends to be flavored with him. I remember telling one person, the sisters, when I was giving them a retreat on Salesian spirituality, I said, I'm afraid I'm giving you a little bit of process Salesian spirituality.
Process being a key word that we associate with Alfred North Whitehead, who spawned a whole field that we know as process philosophy and process theology as well. And the word is very descriptive because for Whitehead, everything is evolving and in process, and he tends to think of us and our world and God himself in those categories. That is the category of becoming or process, more important than fixed essences or static beings. So Whitehead is hard to understand, but I mean, I do think that you can show that he has a practical bent to himself. And I want to take up this question of dualism. I think it was Whitehead himself who said that the major problem in the modern world was not so much finitude, that is us wrestling with our finite character, like saying, geez, I'm not God and I'm limited and I commit sins and I do things wrong. That causes us a lot of trouble, there's no doubt about it, and many people feel that very strongly, sort of an abiding sense of unworthiness or great desire to have more, be more, and not able to accomplish it. And so finitude, as a word that describes that, being finite, not being God, is a big problem for many people. But Whitehead claimed that there was even a bigger problem, and he called it fragmentation, and I'm calling it dualism. That is, that there's a sense of being cut off, that people often feel as though they're not connected in, maybe not connected in with the material world, not connected in with other people, not connected in properly with the church or with God, and so it's easy to feel estranged. There's another philosopher, theologian, Paul Tillich, who used that language. He said, we feel estranged. We're supposed to be friendly and close, but we are cut off in some serious ways. And I believe that that is a major problem for people in today's world.
It's even the question of coming to acceptance of ourselves in our own humanism, in our own humanity, our own materialism. Some people looking at the matter part of themselves as they wish they didn't have to deal with that. The whole sense of how that even is the source of where we come in contact with the spiritual, if you wish, if you would have it. And so I think it really, for Whitehead, is a call to community, that within not just one in the society, but communities, called to community, society, individual within the society, called to community, our sense of call to community with God, and even a sense of well-being or community, if you want, with the lower parts, if you want to speak of that, the material part of ourselves, to accept totally that we're all interrelated and we're all called to that one interdependence with each other, with ourselves and our whole world, that we're not alone.
So Whitehead not only has given us an analysis of the problem, but suggests what I'd call a grand vision for understanding ourselves and our world and our relationship to it. He's often called that a philosophy of organism, is one of the words used. It's called a process philosophy because it emphasizes that the world is changing and evolutionary thought is in, so to speak. It's the dominant hypothesis of how we understand our world. We understand we're changing, so it's a process kind of outlook, but it's also a philosophy of organism, and the word organism suggests connections, an organic connection. The word organic suggests, to me at least, that things aren't just disparate and separated out, but that there are interconnections and deeper bonding than meets the eye. And I think that's one thing that Whitehead does for us, is point us to the deeper bondings that are at work in our world. It's almost, what comes to my mind is the Hindu notion, Advaita Hinduism, which says that the distinctions and the separations, the estrangements, are really all illusions. You just haven't seen deeply enough, so that if two people meet and say, well, one's white and one's black, and therefore we're really different and can't talk, Whitehead's sort of philosophy would say, well, no, look deeper. You've got a bonding in your humanity that undercuts the superficial difference of the color of your skin. And we could say the same thing about nationalities. Very often, I mean, we got all these troubles in the world because of religious differences, nationality differences, and Whitehead's philosophy was geared to overcoming that and saying, wait, there are organic connections, deeper bondings than the difference of race and nationality and religion would suggest.
And it certainly is an issue. I was just a few years in Africa, where there's certainly you experience a fragmentation where the people are fragmented one from another. And the call that I would be hearing from Whitehead is to see what we share, how we depend on each other, how there is an interdependence.
When you're talking about Africa, you're talking about the white-black situation in South Africa.
Namibia and South Africa.
Yes, right. Because, I mean, I think in much of Africa you'd have a very different sense.
Precisely.
You'd have a tribal sense and a real sense of connection and rootedness and belonging to the community or to the tribe that you were describing before. But when we look at Namibia and South Africa, we have a very different situation. Well, John, Alfred North Whitehead is hardly a well-known person. I mean, just to locate him a little bit, he is a philosopher. He started out really as a mathematician. He's born in 1861. I think he died in 1947, as I'm recalling it. And he taught at Cambridge, a famous university in England, and was a well-known mathematician. And late in his life, became a philosopher and a philosopher of religion, and wrote all of these marvelous books about religious matters. And as a result, spawned a whole school of theology known as process theology, which is centered at Claremont University here in the United States, out in California. So that Whitehead has become one of the most significant religious thinkers in the whole history of 20th century thought, and he started it only at the age of 63. I mean, he had a search earlier on, but he came up with his positive solutions only in his later 60s.
Gives us older people a little hope.
That's right. I mean, just by his very life, he's an example, isn't he, that your brain doesn't have to turn off, or that you got to get stagnant at some age or be fixated in your whole outlook. I mean, he's a wonderful example. They say when he came to Harvard to teach, and that's where he wrote these marvelous books, especially Process and Reality, which is, one of his most important books. Although if anybody was really interested in reading his thought, the book to start with is probably Modes of Thought, which he published in 1938. It's a simpler, non-technical statement of his major ideas. So Modes of Thought would be a way of getting started in Whitehead's whole outlook here. But he did this teaching at Harvard, and the stories I've read was that he really was a popular teacher. The students loved this older man who was rethinking his own life and his own outlook, and probably caught a lot of Whitehead's own excitement in the process, and found him to be an engaging teacher and a really good role model for them. So we got Whitehead here, and trying to look a little bit at what he says here in this whole philosophy of organism that he puts before us. John, you want to say a little bit about that philosophy of organism and that grand vision that he had?
I would like to reflect on this aspect. One of the things he speaks of when he talks of organism is that what we do, even sometimes, is if I do something now, it seems not to be successful. That because what is interrelated to everything else that's coming into being in the future, that even if I find a failure in what I'm doing now, that that can later enter into the whole change, that can be picked up later because of the interconnection of us, of things with each other. And sometimes we look at the great people in history. We can even look at Christ and see, what he has done. Probably a Jew of his time would see a failure, and yet what he has done is continues to exist and to live and to change for the betterment of the world. Well, now Christ is special, of course, but Whitehead would speak that this is possible for us. What we do does not end; it enters into a certain immortality.
Yes,
and that will affect us later. Now that's to the good and to bad also.
Right. It gives great significance again to any action that you perform and any decision that you make. But what's behind what you're saying is Whitehead's sense that the whole of reality is interconnected. That this idea that somehow there is a being we call a rock and a tree, and then there's mountains and people, and for some of our outlooks, angels, and then God, that are all sort of separated out. Whitehead said that simply is to be fooled by the appearances of things. That as a matter of fact, the whole world is an organic process. That everything is evolving, and everything it feeds into this evolutionary process. Everything has sort of a bit of spirit in it that unites things. Now that's a hard idea to get. We often call that a panpsychism, meaning there's psyche or spirit in everything in the world. So that it doesn't mean that rocks think in Whitehead's mind, but it does mean that there's a common element in all of reality that binds us together, and a spiritual element which accounts for this evolutionary process that he has discerned.
Right, precisely. Without that call to an ability for something to go higher, then how would we explain that there is the coming into existence life and then intellectual life? And so somehow or other there has to be this mental aspect, if you want.
So if primates did evolve into the first humans, there had to be something in primates that allowed that to happen. And of course Whitehead, sees God as part of this process, close, immanent within it, and God is sort of the driving force of this whole process. So there is something already within the primates that would allow them to make this leap into consciousness, into what we now know as human life. One of the things that, John, that he helps us to do is to deal with these dualisms, and let's just look at some of those. One of the dualisms that we often feel these days is the dualism between us as humans and the material world. It's helped create the environmental crisis. It's a sense like, well, we're the ones who are running this world, and we can do anything we want with it. If you want to cut down rainforests, you just go ahead and do it, and build factories, and they pollute the air. I mean, so what? We humans are in charge, and it's very often based on the premise that we're cut off from nature. And one of the things Whitehead wants us to do is to see that we are the product of nature. We're the product of the evolutionary process, and now we in turn ought to guide that process into a better future. So he connects us in with nature. It's not like we're standing here and looking at a tree, but it's like we're all part of an ongoing process of development, and we've now become the intelligent leading edge of that evolutionary process. We're a product and a guiding force.
And even in that, when he speaks of us as the intelligent edge, he also reminds us, don't forget that you also are a body made of material things, and this also is part of who you are. It's a whole challenge to the world today is we're all in it together. It isn't me against the world. The world isn't something that I have to control in the sense of manipulating. It is something that I work with and cooperate with, and that it is part of who I am, to the sense that everything interrelates with everything else, and everything is being called to a higher part. And
so our body is what links us, is what you're saying, with the evolving material world. So we can say, I have a body, but I can also say, I am my body. And Whitehead is very big in that. I am my body. My body links me in with this material world. We have the same building blocks within our bodies as we find in trees and rocks and the rest of the material world.
The material world is part of who we are.
Right.
He would identify unity.
Yes, we carry it within us. He even says that, doesn't he?
Yes.
The soul, our soul, if we can use that word in his language, it sort of collects what the material world's all about. The whole world is contained in our soul,
right,
is one of his notions, and that's a little poetic, I suppose, maybe hard to understand, but in a way we are open to everything. I mean, we can learn about everything, and we have the same building blocks within us. So Whitehead one of the things that flows from Whitehead is an environmental ethic. One of his followers, John Cobb, who's known as a process theologian, has written an important book on the environment, and it's called Is It Too Late? a theology of ecology. And so John Cobb, working with Whitehead's ideas, says, well, we've got to care for this earth because it's our duty, because we're the leading edge and we're connected in with this earth. So you can, out of Whitehead's thought, get a fine outlook on the environment, a real ethic that would help us preserve this world of ours.
I would find it as a call to respect creation, to respect it all, because I am not other than, I am part of.
That's well said, yeah. Respect, key word.
Mm-hmm.
John, let's look at another dualism that often comes in. Dualism means that there's two things split apart that maybe ought not be split apart, and that would be the split between body and soul. And what Whitehead suggests is the idea that the soul is stuck into our body and it's going to escape at death simply doesn't reflect the reality. For Whitehead, we are a unified whole. And one of the ways you can get at that is to think about a headache, as he suggests. That you think about how a headache can put you in a bad mood and affect your spirit. It can make it difficult to pray, for example. It can make it be difficult to act civilly towards other people. And when you begin to think about how the bodiliness affects our spirit or psyche, you get some sense of this unity. I mean, we are a psychosomatic unity, as people say today. We even talk about psychosomatic diseases where the spirit is influencing the bodiliness. So, and just let me use a positive example, which he uses also, I think, and that is look at how exercise can help you feel better. I mean, you might take a walk on a beautiful sunshiny day and get out some of the tension and stress, and you feel much more integrated and together and can function better in the world. So he says that's a mistake to think we are a soul stuck into a body. We are really a unified whole. He tries to overcome that dualism as well.
Yeah, and it's with the whole sense that as I reflect on myself as a person, that I don't simply see myself as a head, if you will, a mind.
Yes.
That I am. And this is called today, as you were talking about, a holistic sense, that if I am more than that, then I have to say that I must care for my body, for it is me. It is part of who I am. It is part of what God has given me to be. And that whole sense of, as you say, in exercise today, the sense that we're saying, we just don't say to ourselves, misusing drugs, alcoholism. All this is sort of seeing ourselves other than. The body is sort of something that we carry along like a car, that we ride in. But the car is us, as Whitehead would say.
Yes.
The driver and the car are one. And that's it all goes back to the whole sense of respecting. We must respect my body. And that's, of course, a very Christian thing, too.
Oh, yeah, it's very incarnational, isn't
Right.
it? Because we respect the material creation because we say God came and lived this personal existence, this bodily existence of ours. Therefore, we must respect it because God has respected it. There's a whole spirituality, too, John, that flows from what you were saying there. That is that you don't just think of spirituality as reading your Bible or going to Mass or saying night prayers, but it has to do with diet and exercise and not abusing drugs and so on. All of that is part of growing as a Christian, coming closer to God. Why? Because we are a unified whole, because our bodiliness affects our spiritual aspect. Mm-hmm. So you can bring in a great reminder about spirituality of bodiliness here. Diet, exercise, proper sleep, and so on.
And how that helps us in our own spiritual life, and how it goes back to the spiritual helps the body, that they are both there. That's certainly true of anybody who's trying to study for a test.
Yeah, that's right. Let's look at a third dualism. So what do we look so far? Human beings cut off from the world and a dualism between body and soul. And we're saying Whitehead's philosophy of organism helps us overcome those. So the next third dualism I'd like to look at is that between the individual and the community. Now you adverted to that earlier, and I said some beautiful things about all that. You used the word community a lot in describing reality. But I think Whitehead's point would be that we really exist in community. We start out in community. We grow up in families, and we only gradually establish what he might call a relative independence from the community. In other words, we never can step back totally from it because we're a product of it, and we remain related to parents, to family, to siblings, to our friends from the past. You can't ever just say all that's dead or over or forgotten. We remain influenced by all of those relationships. So I guess what Whitehead is calling us to is really a sort of wholehearted participation in the life of a community.
Because he would say not only are we related to the community, do we have what we are because of community, but also community becomes what it is because of us. So each of us has something to give to community, and that's that interrelatedness too. That I cannot just say, as some people would tend to step back and feel that, what's going on in this world, in society, the society is bad, therefore I will step back away from it. I will run away from society. But I also have something to give to society. I help make society. I also take away from society. So it goes both ways.
Yeah.
And to me, what's important in that is my vision of church. I am baptized into a community, is what I see as a Christian. And I see Whitehead saying that to us. Look, you're not just coming into this world alone, and I'm not just coming into this world as a Christian alone. I am being invited as church, as community. And that's very much the whole thing of God, the Spirit, calling us to community. And that's there in every aspect of our life, and even communities being called to the greater community. You see people talking today about the world community, and so it's not just me and my family, or my family or myself and community, the city of Toledo or Ohio or the United States. It's not just us against the world. It is a call for each person and each community to become more complex, if you want, to quantize.
And more connected with other communities or larger communities.
So that we eventually see ourselves as community. And so there's that vision that's seen in the world today, the call to a world community, which Whitehead would very much say yes to.
Yes, I think he sees, John, that there's sort of two things going on that is suggested here, and that I got out of your comment as well, and that is that there's a way in which we draw from the community. We're shaped by the community. We're given strength and guidance and wisdom from the community, whether it's family or church or neighborhood or nation. But also we have a responsibility to help the communities to grow. In other words, it isn't good enough just as a child to grow up in a family and take all your parents give you. You have to give something back to it. And in the same way, we have to give something back to our parents, anywhere along the line, whatever their age. So there's a reciprocal kind of relationship that Whitehead calls us to. In church circles, we talk about that as being co-responsible for the church. I mean, you go to the church, you have the liturgy, and you get nourishment, and you hear the word, and maybe in various ways you get spiritual guidance or concrete help in life, but you also have to give something back. Have to put something into the Mass as well as get something out of it. Have to help other people as well as absorb the message of the gospel.
Precisely, and that's even in Whitehead's philosophy. In the beginning, we absorb, we take in all the experiences of the past, but in the end, we are called to be part of that experience for the future. And so he says we take in, but we are ultimately called to give. And that's very much in that sense of Christ, calling us to community and then sending us. Whitehead would talk about, in our own experience as we are formed, taking in all the past experiences, events, as he would call actualities, and becoming what we can become from that, and even being limited because of who they are, and at the same time being called to enter into the greater so that can become more and greater.
Right, so it does fit into his whole worldview, doesn't it? That everything is in process, the whole world's evolving, we humans are evolving, God is changing in this philosophy of organism, and we must be part of the process. We take in the energy from the past, and we have to then expend some of that energy in trying to create a better future. So here's another side to this community thing that I like, John, and that is his claim is that that's where we will find our deepest enjoyment and fulfillment in life. It's not just a heavy sort of duty thing, like I got to give back to the community because I got something, or boy, I got to take care of my parents or something because they were so good to me. Or I got to somehow be patriotic in this country of ours, but I don't care that much about it. It's just the opposite. Whitehead says there's a deep enjoyment, a satisfaction that comes from wholehearted participation in community life. And I like that idea, that you'll find that it's not a drag, but community life helps us to flower and enjoy.
It enjoyment, yes.
Yeah.
Enjoyment, and that we are, in a sense, to later be that source of enjoyment to the community in the future. Yeah, that's a very good and an important thing for me, because sometimes we get it so much into what's in it for me and what do I have to do. when actually he moves us out of that mindset and says to us, what you are called is to enjoy and to feel, what does he call it, adventure and zest. And that's how we share in God. And so that it isn't the sense of having to do it, but by doing this, I find fullness of what I am. Because I am not isolated. I am meant to be interconnected. And in that interconnection and in that experiencing all that, I find enjoyment or satisfaction, as he says, too.
But John, that's well put, and really helps to bring some closure and summary to what we've been talking about here. I suppose there's a final dualism. That's the dualism between God and the world, and Whitehead also helps us overcome that by reminding us that God is very immanent and within the world and part of the process. So we've been looking at Alfred North Whitehead, and Whitehead's claim is that fragmentation and estrangement are a major problem for people in the modern world. And he suggests a way to overcome that through his philosophy of organism. And that philosophy suggests that the whole world is interconnected. It's a grand vision of a world that's organically related. So everything is close and interacting with each other. So we can say that Whitehead helps us overcome those dualisms so that we really sense not only that we are a unified whole, but we're connected in with the world and with the various communities that have formed and shaped us. Good.
Okay, we got through another one.
Wonderful. You're game for another one.
Yeah, one more.
Good for you, John. Good. Marvelous. Let's do that hope and that last part.
Yeah, well, I think that, this is really where he says strongest, by the way.
Yes.
Actually, I think it's the grace aspect.
Being in two places at one time. Their claim was that it's impossible.
So that it is in the sense of how